Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. We are coming to you from our headquarters in Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. I am Babla Jonathan. In today's edition of The Insight, we are focusing on the federal solution to the decades-old Anglophone problem opposing a faction of the Cameroonians from the northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon, former British Southern Cameroons, and the central government in the nation's capital city, Yaoundé. We're looking at the federal solution to the problem that resulted to the outburst late 2016, thus the prevailing unstable socio-political and economic and of course security climate prevailing in those two crisis-stricken regions of the Republic of Cameroon. We are also looking into the future of the country, Cameroon, after her second president, Paul Biya, who's been in power for more than 4 decades. We are, however, not predicting anything here. We are just looking into the future and analyzing possible scenarios that could crop up after the reign of President Paul Biya with regards to the present state of the nation under his reign. And we're going to be analyzing all of these in this edition of The Insight. Meet our guest in some few seconds. With me here in the studio, Sylvanus Mutagatifu, who is a politician, member of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, CRM political party, special advisor to the national president of that political party, Professor Maurice Kamto. Sylvanus Mutaga, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Babla Jonathan, for inviting me. Greetings to all the millions of televiewers of this program, The Insight. It's an honor for me to also be present to edify Cameroonian and the world at large on issues that are plaguing or rogging the political scene of our nation. We are talking of the Anglophone crisis, which sparked out in 2016 amidst numerous social issues. Today, it's almost about 7 years gone, and there are a number of people that have died, thousands of them, both civilians and uniformed officers. You can imagine it.
Right, and Ben Aki joins us from Syracuse in New York, United States of America. He's a civil society activist, author of several books, including The West Cameroon Problem and Its Solution, The People of Cameroon Thought a New Federal Constitution, and Cameroon After Paul Biya. Ben Aki, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Babila. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here to discuss these two very important topics which you have highlighted.
You're part of the Federalist movement proposing the federal solution to the decades-old Anglophone problem, which led to the outburst late 2016, and then the socio-political and security instability prevailing in those two regions till today. What concretely are you people proposing as far as the federal solution to the Anglophone problem is concerned?
Yes, indeed, the Federalist movement is now beyond just the consideration of former Southern Cameroon, so what used to be West Cameroon or today Northwest and Southwest. I would like to start at this point to greet the memory of late Mr. John Frundi and his party, the SDF. So when we talk about federalism in Cameroon today, it is a combination of the cry of the people of former Southern Cameroons or West Cameroon for a return to the federal system of government, but it is also acknowledging the political position of a major political party such as the SDF, and to the credit of the SDF, we're also talking about this form of government as the central idea that is put forward by major opposition parties that took place in the last presidential election. So I'm thinking of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement and also the PCRN of Mr. Cabral, Honorable Cabral Libi. So the idea of a federal system of government is now a central political question that is far beyond just the demand of a return to federation by the people of former Southern Cameroons. So what are we concretely proposing? We are first of all asking that this issue be brought squarely into the political scheme where it is. And I would like to tell you, Mr. Babla, that today, if you put this issue to election, a political party that does not subscribe to federalism will not win a transparent election in Cameroon. So the question becomes, those who are fighting for federalism, how do they recognize the momentum that is there in the country and channel this momentum to a peaceful political resolution of the issue? So that's the aspect we're looking at. You've introduced me as a as a civil society activist. I'm also a federalist with the coalition of Cameroon federalist groups and activists. And activities are going on there. They are converging to this notion that political parties that are in the opposition, the major opposition parties that took part in the last election, they are subscribed to federalism, and we know that federalism is going to sustainably resolve the political clashes, the armed conflict in the US. So the question is, how do we bring this issue to the central political square of the country?
Right, and getting the actors or the stakeholders convinced about this is a key part of pressing or pushing through this federal option as the solution to the Anglophone problem. And now, the SDF, as you mentioned earlier, the Social Democratic Front, has been talking about this for several years. Other persons have been talking about this for several years, but it seems not to be going through. What makes you so convinced that this is the right problem, the right solution rather, to the problem?
Well, the problem is that, first of all, we have to recognize the 40 decades of Mr. Paul Biya, which you have named. He has made himself equal to the state of Cameroon, equal to the electoral system of the country, right? So from that perspective, we have to recognize that the country is for federation, but the people who have taken captive the power, which belongs to the people of Cameroon, these are the people resisting. And there is no indication that they will willingly come to discuss and to accept this form of government. So our hope is that since the next 2 years, the next 3 years are going to be crucial, that there's going to be elections in Cameroon, and now the parties have come, the major opposition parties have mentioned 3 of them, they have come to that point. It is left for civil society activists and for the society to make federalism the central electoral issue. Willingly, the CPDM is not going to convene a dialogue tomorrow to talk about federalism. And as long as that party is against federalism, France is also against federalism, we cannot hope for a dialogue or something like the spectacle we had in 2019 in the name of a national dialogue. The way to do it is for the society to force the political parties to put up federalism as their platform and their promise, and for the society to help them win election and defend that victory by all means. That's the shortest part, and that's the simplest part that we're going to take to get to federalism. To think that out of gratitude, those who have resisted the federal system for many years, they will change their mind. I don't think so. And Mr. Babylon, let me just remind you that in 1972, when the federal system of government was changed in Cameroon, Mr. Paul Biya was the Secretary General at the presidency. So in a sense, he was part of the architect, a part of the team that brought this transition from federation to a centralized unitary state. So you cannot, it is not making any mistake. He has a very clear path that started in the 60s into the 70s, and it amplified itself in 1984 when he was already president. So we do not expect that Mr. Biya will willingly convene a dialogue to talk about this. But hopefully, as you mentioned in the second aspect we're going to talk about, hopefully 2025 will be the time when Cameroonians will have to deal with this issue. For the first time, we have a constitution that prescribes how power transition is going to take place through an election. That is the point where the people have to recognize that the main architect for the abolition of the federal system will be leaving the political scene, because it's not just 4 decades of Mr. Paul Biya in power, it's 5-6 decades. And these 5-6 decades have been dedicated to the demolition of any signs of federalism in Cameroon. So, but it's coming to an end, and the whole country is beginning to recognize that federalism has a chance of stabilizing the country and reinforcing our unity, as well as improving our system of governance.
You're the author of the book, We, the People of Cameroon, Thoughts a New Federal Constitution. You'll tell us more about that shortly. Silvanus Mutaga, what's your opinion about this federal option, the federal option to solve the Anglophone problem?
Now, the very first question we should be asking ourselves is why was the Federal Constitution of 1961 tampered with? And how did they even come about before changing from the Federal Republic of Cameroon to the United Republic of Cameroon, and finally we had to arrive at the Republic of Cameroon? So there are two questions: why and how did it happen? So if we would be looking at why, it's a very big question that is pregnant, and if we answering how, we know that it came up through a referendum that was organized in order to ensure that the federal structure was raised, and then they came to a unitary state. So if we are talking of going back to the Federal Republic again, or the two federal states to exist, how is it going to be done? Is it just a result of political parties put it in the agenda and talking as part of their manifesto, or it has to go through a referendum again? So we are talking of the Anglophone crisis that we are 7 years gone. We will be asking ourselves, were the Anglophones who went out into the street in 2016 and those who went out later fighting for the return to the federal state form of government, what really prompted them to go out revendicating for their rights? Which the very first thing is social injustice, because I want to say that if, as a result of the scraping out of the federal structure of the republic after 1961, the unitary system of government was working for the common goods of Cameroonian, both Anglophones and the Francophones, you find that we would not have reached at the extent of having the Anglophones being disgruntled and some of them vying in for a return to the federal form of government, and even some pushing right to the extreme for separation. You understand that if we want to look at the way the Republic of Cameroon has been run for over the past 3 or 4 decades, you understand that there were some key ministries which were never deemed fit for an Anglophone to manage in this nation. So we take the Ministry of Higher Education, we can take the Ministry of Defense, we take the Ministry of Finance, which are very key ministries. They call them Ministry of the sovereign ministries. Anglophone was regarded as an underdog. If I talk about an Anglophone, we talk of the one from the northwest and the southwest region. So presently, we are in 2023. How are we hoping to handle the issue of federalism? Are we going to be talking of 10 state federations, or we are going to be talking of 2 state federations? Those are questions that are pregnant. We of the CRM having in mind that it should be a federation that is
right. So the federal system is an option for you.
The federal system is an option.
The stalemate in which we find ourselves.
Yes, it's an option for the CRM, because, you know, with this federal system of government, there is the sharing of power. Unlike the confederation, that you find that the central government is instead subordinate to the regional government, or the unitary state, or the decentralized system in which decentralized entities or collectivities are under the dictates of the central system. But for the federation, you understand that there is the sharing of power, and with the a sharing of power, it is easier for effective control of the functioning of the different systems of the state to be easily checked. Or to be easily ensured.
And the confederal system is practically the same.
The confederal system is different.
It's close to the federal system.
It is more. I want to say that the confederation, instead, the central system is subordinate. It means they are answerable to the regions. They are answerable to the regions in a confederation. Whereas in a federation, there is the sharing of power. There's a sharing of power between the two collectivities.
We're focusing today on the federal system of government, and you're raising a series of questions there about how and who is supposed to be doing what if we have to go back there. But what we clearly established from both of you is that the federal option is what should be on the table now to take Cameroon out of the troubled waters in which it finds itself today. But Ben Akin, you're talking about the people of Cameroon going back or touch a new federal constitution. Why a new federal constitution?
First of all, it is recognizing the fact that the social contract of reunification is a federal system of government. And then secondly, is recognizing the fact that the manner in which that system was repressed, was eliminated in 1972, was not entirely constitutional. And my colleagues just mentioned that it was a referendum. That referendum had no significance, given that all elections during Ahidjo in Cameroon, the results were always 100%, and you had just one party. So, and that was a result produced by the state in order to give the semblance of unanimous consent. So we cannot say that even the vote itself had any meaningful commentary on this on the action that took place. In the days of Ahidjo, starting from 1965 to 1980, his last election, elections were always producing results that were 100%. And just one party, no dissent. So there is really nothing to talk about there that it was voted by the people. So the point here is that this constitution, first of all, the president, even the amendment of the constitution as written now in the constitution of Cameroon, can be initiated by the president. And the responsible president is the one that recognizes that the foundation of Cameroon must be such that it is true to history, it is true to the principles of constitutional government, and it is responsive to the demands of the people that are in Cameroon today. So that is the main idea, to say that we need a federal constitution. In that federal constitution, we will recognize that even the constitution of 1961 was the product of people who were in government at that time. Mr. Babila, this is what happens with drafting a constitution. The people draft the constitution always try to retain their power. They try to protect their power. So when you draft a constitution as a president, you draft it to protect your power. But what we are saying is that this new constitution needs to have a different way of getting information into that. And that is why I have written this book proposing concrete federal constitution and a concrete constitution for the potential federated state of former Southern Cameroons. And that means Cameroonians should be able to say what will be inside the constitution. Because power belongs to the people of Cameroon, if these people of Cameroon are called upon to contribute to the drafting of the constitution through a constitutional commission, then they will protect their power. But if this constitution, this federal constitution, is drafted by a president, the president will protect the power. But the essence of a federal system of government is that the presidency is not as powerful as you find in a unitary state or in most Francophone African states. The essence of a federal system of government is that the power resides with the people, so that you end up seeing that parliament and the state have a lot more power than the presidency. What we had in 1961 was just on the borderlines of a federation because the power was retained by the person who drafted the Constitution, and that was the President of the Federal Republic at that time, under the guidance of the French constitutionalists, who are everywhere in Africa trying to draft. And that's why, in this particular instance, first is to recognize that the future of Cameroon is a federation, but second is to recognize that the person drafting the Constitution protects their power. And in that case, Cameroonians should be brought to the table. And this is very crucial because there are so many divisions in Cameroon. It's only when you bring people together and say, okay, let us figure out what should go into this constitution. Then people become polite with one another. People become conciliatory in drafting the ideas. And that is really why we need a new constitution that departs even from the 1961 constitution and that respects the idea that power belongs to the people, and the people should take the center stage in drafting the Constitution, because when they do so, they will protect their power. And when they protect their power, they also protect the president, who is only there for a short time and goes back to be with the people. That's the best way you have. But if you have a constitution drafted by the president, where the president protects their power, then they have no intention to leave the presidency because they know that the system is not balanced. The system is such that the country is taken prisoner by the president. So a president who drafts the constitution will never leave power willingly because they know that the condition of being outside power is very dangerous for the citizen. That's what we need to change in this new constitution.
All right. Now, why not simply go back to the 1961 Federal Constitution instead of going for a new Federal Constitution?
So there are two reasons. There are a number of reasons, but I already cited the first one. That 1961 Constitution was drafted mostly by Mr. Ahidjo under the guidance of France, and therefore he protected his power more than the power of the people and the states. Secondly, he was in discussion with John Good Foncha, and Mr. Foncha was more interested in becoming president afterward. So he was more concerned about the articles that are related to the vice president of the republic than talking about the powers of the state. And you remember in 1968, the president of the Federal Republic removed the prime minister of a federated state in West Cameroon, Mr. Augustin Gomjoa. That tells you immediately that you cannot simply replace this centralized, this unitary state constitution with the Constitution of 1961. And so coming to talk about why we cannot simply go back then, my personal preference about the structure of the new federation is to emphasize the fact that we need to protect the two core value systems that we have. There is a core value system that belongs to former Southern Cameroons. There is a core value system that belongs to former French Cameroon. But from the context of governing the country such that power is closer to the people, I recognize that making all of French Cameroon into one federated state may not be the best idea. And that is why the position I defend is not a 10-state or a 2-state. It's defending the idea that the former Southern Cameroons should form a federated state. It should be up to the people in the other 8 regions to decide whether they want to have 8 federated states, 1 federated state with decentralization internally, or they want to group together and say, this region wants to make a federated state with the other region. For example, the West region and Littoral may want to form a state, the North and Far North and Adamawa may want to form a state. So we cannot simply go back to the 1961 Constitution that split the country asymmetrically into West Cameroon and East Cameroon. And even under that Constitution, we look carefully the way the 1961 to 1972 Federation was run. It was almost such that the people in East Cameroon never behaved like a federated state. Everything was given. So that is why it is important for us to think carefully about, yes, 1961 was the foundation, the very idea that we are a federal system of government, the very idea that we need to protect the two core value systems. These ideas are good and are important. But the bad ideas in 1961 Constitution is the unlimited power, the absolute plein pouvoir that you have of the president. We need to reduce those powers and have the state have more power. And then talking about the administration, the boundaries of the state, a federation requires that the people themselves talk about the boundaries of their state. It's not, if you look at the history of Cameroon, Cameroon has always been in the logic of imposing boundaries somewhere. Mr. Babila, ask yourself, why is it that in Cameroon today we have a region called West Region, which is not west of the country? So even this idea of dividing the country already begins with the government. The government puts a West region, and then after this West region, you have Northwest and Southwest. So it's dividing the country artificially. All of these are politics that were generated by France and implemented by Cameroon. So we cannot go back to 1961 Federation, but we must appreciate the contract of reunification being federalism as a very good thing for the country. We must appreciate that the two value systems, legal system, educational system, and just governance philosophy, they're different. These need to be protected in that new federation.
Right, so we cannot just go back to the Silvanus Mutagan. What do we need now? A constitutional amendment or a referendum first?
To be candid, I think that at this particular juncture, to resolve the ongoing crisis and war in the Northwest and Southwest region, it is merely beyond the issue of constitutional amendments at this particular, at this juncture. Like I told you, we know the protagonists, the actors to the crisis going on in the Northwest and Southwest region. I honestly believe that if we were to be talking of any form of the state, it would have to be with their consent, those in prisons and those who are fighting the war down at ground zero. So, but to reach at that extent, it would warrant the release of Ayub Tabe, the release of Manchu BBC and the rest, and then I'm of the opinion that Anglophones should sit among themselves and talk out exactly what they want, and they would now reach a table of dialogue with the fellow Francophone brothers, and finally we would discuss on the form of federalism which we want. Obviously it's not going to be the old form of federalism which was practiced in 1961. There are a lot of ramifications owing to the fact that in the early stage of Cameroon's independence, you understand that the Anglo-Saxon system of education was purely an Anglophone issue, which it had not yet fully been accepted by the Francophones. The same way that you find that the Anglophones had not yet fully accepted the Francophone system of government, of education. Today, we have more Francophones that are studying in the Anglo-Saxon subsystem of education, and it would be quite very biased to think that they themselves would not have their say on exactly what they think that the educational system should be managed, how it has to be managed. So,
but would that not be synonymous to the major national dialogue, which some people qualify today as a monologue? And so would that not be synonymous to that? Because other people think that it should be a discussion, a dialogue between the people concerned of the two English-speaking regions of Cameroon and the government and the central government, not a national kind of discussion.
That's the reason I said that us debating on the form of the state at this particular juncture is quite good, but to add substance to what we are saying, meaning to what we are saying, it will have to do with the will of the frontliners
we are part of those people who want a federal system of government. There are others who have pushed forward, they want a total separation and independence. So we would have to sit down, discuss, negotiate with them, make them to reason why we need to have a federal system of government that we all concord is the best system of government that will guarantee transparency, would erase social injustice and all the frustrations that the Anglophones have witnessed all through the 50 and above years of independence that we've enjoyed. So I am not categorically or even saying that I'm against the notion that we should rethink of federalism, but I said before we ever think of running back to federalism, which we all said, it has to do with the collaboration of those who have really orchestrated the present situation of Cameroon, where we have bloodshed in the northwest and southwest region. And you know for certain that the regime in place, the government in place, has been so adamant, because if we look at the method which they used to resolve the grievances of the Anglophones from the early stage, which Ni John Fundi, peace be unto his, may so rest in perfect peace, had been warning the Yaoundé government that there are frustrations in the northwest and southwest region. I remember Joseph Biwibatu went to Yaoundé, he said there are frustrations, but the government was so adamant, because during those periods of warnings, if the government had yielded or had understood them, I don't think we would have even reached at the stage of war today. Because, you know, when I was reading one of the American novel, or it's a book, The American and Its People, they tell us that a system of government or systems in which people have been used to change it, it cannot suddenly be changed without there being adverse effects to the people. So I'm not saying they should not go back to federalism, but I said if it has to be done, I think there are preconditions to it. You don't just get up in the morning. I think at this particular juncture, federalism is a magic stick that you wave it and then you see peace return to the northwest and southwest region. No, there are a lot of interest groups which are vying for independence. So we need to use a lot of diplomacy. We need to negotiate with them. We need to talk to them to bring them back home. I am not part of those who think that they should be treating them as terrorists, castigate, and think that they should completely wipe them out from the planet Earth. No, there are countries where we see of recent, there's a case in, I think it was in Ethiopia, where a part of Ethiopia, Tigris, they wanted their independence. I'm quite sure you know exactly how diplomacy came in, and it was
Tigray region.
Tigray region. It was managed. So I want to think that we are. Time is running against us. Time is really against us, because if some of the recommendations of the monologue that was organized in Yaoundé, the release of Ayok Tabi and the rest. Since the monologue, we've not seen anything. Look at recent, we have militants of the Cameroon Renaissance movement. They are almost 3 years gone in the prison, sentenced simply because they went out in the street and said no, elections could not be held in 2020 with war going on in the northwest and southwest region, because those elections were regional elections, but they were held in prison. So you find that the government does not even have the will. If we are talking about federalism, they don't have the will. I want to think that they have a particular interest in seeing the war going on, because
but the government authorities and those
the
government authorities and those who are close to President Paul Biya and the CPDM and so on have been saying that the head of state has demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt his political will, his decision, his desire to solve this problem, and so on. And after the major national dialogue, a lot of things have been done on the ground, the putting in place of the regions and so on and so forth. But we're not talking about that today. Now, let me come to you, Ben Aki. When you talk about a new federal constitution that will be different from the 1961 federal constitution, how will this solve the problem of discrimination, social injustice, and other issues like these that are the center of this Anglophone problem? And then we have the Anglophone crisis now. How will that constitution solve the problem when we know that even the present constitution is not fully implemented? There is Article 66 that is not implemented till today on the declaration of properties by those holding public offices before and after before the appointment and after or before they leave office, or after they must have left office. How will that constitution solve these problems?
Yes, Mr. Babila, let me first begin by disagreeing with the previous speaker, and I realize it's also from the opposition party. I just want to remind the people of the Cameroon Renaissance movement that in 2.5 years, 3 years, Mr. Biya could be voted out of office and their party could be voted into office. They need to recognize that the conflict in Cameroon, and especially in the Anglophone region, is very, very, very complex. So they cannot just take advantage of the fact that this government needs to be criticized and they simplify the solution. As it is, you cannot sit down with a separatist and convert the separatist to a federalist. It's going to be impossible. Whenever a separatist leader becomes a federalist, that separatist leader is disowned by the people. So the constitution, let me come back to the way this constitution, if you want to change a complex system like Cameroon, you must go from law to law. That means you must use this constitution in order to get to the new constitution. Some people say we should have a transitional government and suspend the constitution. And that's the position of Madam Cartwell. But also the people, like CRM here, in an attempt to criticize the government, simply say, oh, let us sit down and do an inclusive dialogue. Cameroon is very, very complex. This is what this constitution says, that the amendment of the constitution could be initiated by 1/3 of parliament or the president himself, and the president can send that revised text to parliament to be voted in, or the president can send the new constitution, the revised constitution, to a referendum. But a good president who understands the complexity of the problem is going to recognize that to solve the problem in the Northwest and Southwest, in former British Southern Cameroon, is to find a good constitution that will win the hearts of the people. That's what I explained in my book, The West Cameroon Problem and Its Solution. So the first thing is that the president must make a clear commitment that you're going to return to the system of government, which is federalist. The content of the federal constitution will be put together with very extensive consultation by a constitutional commission. The president can put together that commission to advise him on that constitutional content, and that content will be put to referendum, which the people can vote against or vote in favor. And that's how you can take up the issue first of all together. But in the West Cameroon problem and its solution, I am not simply saying that we should return to federalism, but that clear commitment is going to create the space for the government to solve the problem. So the first thing is the government has to make the president who is in power say the transition from federal system to a unitary system was not a good one. The federal constitution of 1961 was not a great constitution. It is time for us to go back to federalism. It's time for us to make sure that that federal constitution is drafted with maximum input from the people. I will create a mechanism for that. And also go ahead to say it is time for us to talk about the boundaries of that federal system of government through part of the referendum. You can have the referendum on 2 questions. Do you agree with the content of the Constitution? What should the boundaries of the federation be? You can give option. Do you want to just have your state, or do you want to have your state in combination with another region? These are questions that can be settled through a referendum, and that's the best way that this issue will be resolved. So, talking about how you protect the Constitution, I would just want to invite Cameroonians to really read, especially that we, the people of Cameroon, towards a new federal constitution. There are many mechanisms that allow you to protect a minority within a federation like Cameroon. There are many mechanisms that allow you to control the actions of government. There are many mechanisms that allow you to make sure that corruption is not the order of the day like we have now in the unitary state. So what are some of these mechanisms? These mechanisms are checks and balances and clear separation of the branches of government. Right now, the Constitution says that the president guarantees the functioning of the judiciary system, and we know that this parliament can never pass a law that is not started by the president. Parliament in most of Francophone Africa is a hand-clapping situation. We have seen an example now in France, where the parliament is against a particular measure. The same philosophy that is used for our constitution was used by Mr. Macron to pass a law that is not in sync with what the parliament wants. Granted, what Mr. Macron has done is good for France, because French people have the lowest retirement age and they depend on the benefits from Africa to live a luxurious life with early retirement. So the reform is good, but it is the place of the president to convince the parliament to vote, and so that it sounds like this law is for the people. So you have a system.
Benaki, I'll come back to you. Right.
In this particular case, the Constitution, for example, the ideas are proposed. They allow for independence of the judiciary. They allow for independence and even supremacy of the legislature. So the federal parliamentary system, the federal judiciary system, and the reduced power of the executive, they enable you to check some of these excesses we find in this constitution, such as the president not declaring his assets, ministers not declaring their assets. But we see that every day when they give something to your region, the newspapers, and some of it your colleagues, Mr. Babila, they say, Mr. Paul Biya has generously donated this, when that money is coming from state. So we need to do that lot by clearly dividing this power. The next level of protection is that you clearly determine the power that belongs to the state, the power that belongs to the federal government. And there is another state of protection of the powers of the people, is to make sure that you have a very strong competitive political party scene. The best protective system for a country, such as a presidential system we have in Cameroon, is really to have two major parties. If you have 300 parties, they are not really going to do. You can have 300 parties, but in the minds of the people, they must know that we have really two parties that go up and clash against each other. This clashing of the two parties from morning to evening, they will control the government for you and make sure that the government is doing what it's supposed to be doing, because if they don't do it while in office, they will be voted out easily.
All right, Benaki, I'll come back to you shortly. Thank you so much for those analyses. Silvanus Mutaga, you think that for all what we are talking about now to work or to produce the needed results, those who are detained, the Anglophone leaders who are detained, Sisikwa, Yuktabe and the others, Mancho, BBC, should be released. But those are people who have been found guilty by the competent court, the military court in particular, of crimes, and they have been sentenced to different jail terms. Now, why do you think that these people should be released for things or to open the way to the solution to the Anglophone problem?
Mr. Babla Jonathan have always said, and very emphatically, that desperate situations trigger desperate measures. You will bear in mind with me that we have numerous cases of riot in our nation. Let's take the case of the recent riot in Sangmalima, that it was looting and not the like, and somebody even died. We look at the case of the so-called microbe in Douala. It's not different from what happened in 2016 when Mancho BBC entered the coffin in Bamenda, and he was out with Galen Felix and a good number of parents to ask for good roads in the northwest region, ask for potable water, and they were quite against the Anglo-Saxon subsystem of education that was already being adulterated. So it's not something that really warrants them to have 15 years, some of them right up to life imprisonment. I want to maybe comment on what Dr. Akin just said. The CRM political party, which I represent here, is a very respectable political party in Cameroon, and the party has always been for the people and saying that federalism is the best form of government because it ensures that the interests of the people is best safeguarded, protected, because the people are the ones that own the power. They can easily control government action, and in the same way that the central government can easily control the actions of the other part of the regional, or that's the federal government. So we are not in any way against federalism. Presently, we are working on that, and the CRM has top on its agenda. So what I want to say is, if you look at the constitution to be modified, or for there to be any constitutional amendment, it has to do with the political party in power. If it's not the political party in power, that opens door for maybe a referendum, or for the parliament to work on the amendment of the constitution and all the like. It would not work. Let us look at a very simple thing at this particular juncture. We are talking about,
will it not work?
If the party does, if the political party in power hasn't that way, we know exactly how the parliament is obeyed. It is predominantly 90 to 100% CPDM. They are there, they work according to the dictates of the executive. We know for certain that the parliamentarians who are of the CPDM, they don't initiate anything of their own.
And that's what they call party discipline.
They do what they call party discipline. So that's why I said that talking at this particular juncture of modifying the constitution, talking of federalism, it's good for the ears, but for it to have any meaningful impact, we need a new president from a neutral political party, either from the opposition, who has that will, because they have suffered the injustice that has been imposed on them by the system in place due to the central system of government. They are vying in for it. It is good for them to talk. We are talking of, I want to take example of a very simple issue. We are talking of the consensual reform of the electoral system. You know exactly how the electoral system has been largely criticized, even by ELECAM, that is the organ in charge of organization of elections in our nation here. They say there are certain portions of the law, the electoral code, there is supposed to be a reform in a consensual way. Political parties of the opposition, the CRM, and other political parties had a platform which they sit and they have made proposals to the central government, which is the CPDM government, on the need for that reform to be done. The CPDM is not willing. Like I told you, what I think at this particular juncture is that Cameroonians should be ready to understand that there is a time when the cup of endurance runs over and people are not willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. They stand up and say, no, we have to fight for our rights. That time is coming in 2025. The CRM is working tremendously, relentlessly, to ensure that Cameroonians are registered on electoral lists, because we know change can only be done through the ballot. But how would that change be effected? The change has to be done by the people voting for the candidate that is having the interests of the people at heart and protecting the vote, because we know exactly how the rigging machinery of Mr. Biya has been perfected since years to ensure that he remains in power till thy kingdom come, and if he dies, certainly he will be struggling to transfer the power unconstitutionally or democratically to another stooge that will maintain the people of Cameroon in perpetual pain and misery. That is exactly what we are saying. We are not against federalism. We think federalism is the best form of government, but we say there's a precondition. I am not in a way saying that I am...
The precondition, according to you, is that there should be a change at the helm of the state.
There should be a change at the helm of the state, and those in prison should be released, because we are talking presently the northwest and southwest region is practically a no-go area. Elections are unable to be organized there because there is terrorism being exercised by the regular soldiers who are constantly on confrontation with the non-state combatants, and the non-state combatants are terrorizing the people. It makes it practically very unbearable for the people in the northwest region to be talking of elections. So it's a precondition for dialogue to hold, and after dialogue there will be election. The electoral reform should be done, and after the electoral reform is done, the candidate that wins
would be that candidate that would think on exactly what has to be done with regard to the form of the state, which federalism is the best and remains the best option till thy kingdom come.
Even though the authorities have been saying that there is gradual return to normalcy in several parts of those two regions, and that the soldiers have been professional protecting the territorial integrity of Cameroon and the people over there, yet there is a stalemate, there is a deadlock that is prevailing there because of the situation and the response that is given to the situation, which seems not to be meeting the aspirations of the people and a faction of the population who are the extreme, some demanding for cessation, as you indicated, outright independence. Let's go to the newsstands and see what the newspapers reported this week in Cameroon. This is the press review by Immaculate Fogwe.
The Horizon questions what could be the solution to the extrajudicial killings that continue to prevail in the northwest and southwest regions. Cameroon Insider focuses on the Feast of Tabaski as Muslim faithful say yes to peace and no to hate. Municipal update. Disbursing at least 15% state budget to council fears over alarming mismanagement and embezzlement. The Guardian Post reports Social Democratic Front national chairmanship position next sets tough conditions to get Frundi's successor. The party raises non-refundable caution fee for aspirants from 50,000 francs to 7 million francs. The Sun, Elekam chair, Eno Abrams Egbe, pays glowing tribute to the late chairman John Frundi. He says the late SDF chairman will be remembered for his significant contribution in advancing democracy in Cameroon. As reported by the Guardian Post, Emmanuel Wafo and co are currently in court. The Cameroon Employers Union, known by its French acronym GICAM, and Enterprises of Cameroon, known by its French acronym ECAM, which ranges on a group of members who are against the merger, causing them to go to court. According to Eagle's Eye, 9 bills adopted so far at the National Assembly. Cameroon echoes World Music Day celebration in the Southwest region. Musicians exhibit exceptional talent while hailing culture delegate for the support.
Thank you, Immaculate Fogwe, for the press review. We'll continue with the discussion now. We are talking about Cameroon after President Paul Biya. Cameroon after her second president, who's been in power for 4 decades, more than 4 decades now. And Ben Aki, one of your books is on this subject. The book is titled Cameroon after President Paul Biya. What are you saying in that book?
I think if we look at the suffering of our brothers and sisters in the Northwest and Southwest, because of this conflict and the confusion, we must be very careful about preventing any further escalation or broadening of the problem and find a way to solve what is happening in Northwest and Southwest. This book is prompted by the analysis that 90 years have already gone by. Mr. Biya has not done anything to resolve that conflict. Also possible that if we do not manage the transition that follows his the end of his term, we can end up with more conflict. So it is normal for somebody, because most of our lives we're always thinking ahead. We're trying to think ahead. We're thinking ahead to look at what possibilities are there for us, which of these possibilities is best for us, and what can we do to maximize, or what can we do to make sure that that situation that is best for us should realize itself. When we do that analysis, we will easily come to the idea that it is preferable for Cameroon to be stable and to be prosperous after Mr. Biya has left office. So we are looking for a stable situation, but we have to recognize that this is not automatic. This stable situation after Mr. Biya leaves office, political stability, a peace returning to Northwest and Southwest, peace and justice returning to Northwest and Southwest, and there being prosperity and limited corruption in the government of Cameroon. This is not a given. There are many competing alternatives. Some of these competing alternatives come from people who do not want to lose power, but also some of the alternatives come from people who have the good interest of the people of Cameroon at heart, but they are naive to think about how that change can come about. For example, my colleague from the Cameroon Renaissance movement has just described what needs to be done in order for us to get to peace. Some of these things are impractical because the Cameroon after Paul Biya is really saying that when you look at the whole range of things that could happen, and you ask yourself which one can lead to a stable and prosperous Cameroon, you recognize that it is a transition that takes place within the framework of the law towards gradually a better system of laws that will stabilize and make the country more just and prosperous. So this book is very necessary because it is very rare that you have a president who has been in power for 4 decades and goes away and everything continues normally, because within these 40 years, that president has given the impression that he is next to God or is God himself, and without him, nothing is going to function. So people psychologically internalize that dependence on the wisdom of the president, but then at the same time, that president has already shown from the Anglophone crisis that the mechanisms to keep the country stable are no longer effective. So that's really what we have to think about in terms of what happens after Paul Biya. Look ahead, look at the possibility, choose the possibility that is most likely to lead to stability, because stability and prosperity is better than the system of anarchy, or is better than the system of armed conflict. We know this because our brothers and sisters are suffering terribly, even if the government is pretending that normalcy has returned to that region.
All right, Silvanus Mutaga, looking at the present state of the nation and some of the agitations that have been going on within the ranks of the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, the ruling party, within the ranks of the administration, and even within the ranks of some movements like the movement with the president's son, Frank Biya, at the center of the Fikis movement and so on. What's your perception about the future of Cameroon after its second president, Paul Biya?
Mr. Babla Jonathan, the very first thing I would like to say is that Cameroon is not a kingdom. It's supposed to be a democracy. And the president that is supposed to take over from Mr. Biya before or in 2025 would have a lot of problems to resolve in this nation. He would be having problems with the judicial system that they need to ensure that it is completely independent. He would have to guarantee its independence. He would be having a lot of problems, especially with ensuring that many that the road infrastructures of the nation is harnessed. He will be having problems, especially with our educational system that needs to be reformed. He will be having a lot of problems, especially with the mentalities of Cameroonians that is supposed to be liberated, because Cameroonians would be at the point of being mature to think for themselves rather waiting for other persons to think for them. So to grant Cameroonians such responsibility would have to go with a lot of sensitization. So the next president that is coming after Mr. Biya would be having a lot of work to do. So he would be having a lot of problems to render the youth responsible by ensuring that the youth can create for themselves jobs through maybe active involvement in agriculture with incentives from the system in place. And then the worst of all the problems is that the next president will be having huge sums of money that the nation will have to pay as in forms of debt, money that was collected from the International Monetary Fund and other financial institutions to be used for construction of major infrastructures in our nation, and the money ended up in private pockets and no one is accountable for it. That is a very
image of the country that the next president is supposed to inherit from Mr. Biya. So we are of the opinion that the next president that is supposed to come after Mr. Biya must be somebody that is intellectually viable, he must be morally upright, he must be that kind of person that is so patient enough, and he must be that kind of person that masters Cameroon. So without that kind of a person coming after Biya to take over this country from the pit that it is, I'm telling you that we will be going in for another 40 years or even more of slavery, misery, agony, and you name the rest.
That is, if the current head of state, Paul Biya, does not take the nation out of that situation.
He is practically not going to take the
before going.
He is practically not going to take the nation out of this particular situation that I have just analyzed, looking at his age, which is a blessing from God. But physically, he is not fit, because we know the president that we had in 2000, who could at least manage to stand even for a presidential campaign for the next 3 or 4 minutes. We saw what happened in 2018. He couldn't. We are talking of the President of the Republic, who said that those who are caught guilty of embezzlement would be made to pay even to the last dime. It's not done. The embezzlement of the AFCON budget, the embezzlement of funds that were attributed for the fight against COVID-19, and finally the Glencore issue that came up through Senior Barrister Akeremuna. We've been expecting, if that's the kind of president that you think that would leave all these problems and somebody that is mediocre will come after to solve it, Cameroonians should open their eyes, because we are going to go in for another 40 years of misery. And that's why we say, and we continue to say, the only man that is ripe at this particular juncture to take this country forward should be a man of the caliber of Professor Maurice Kamto. I'm not making his campaign, but I should be very frank to say so. I hear from the Northwest region, which I think that after 2 presidents, Biya, that's Ayijo and Biya, the next president of this nation was supposed to be an Anglophone. But looking at the stakes, at the present stakes, Anglophones are more divided. They are not united. They are not strategizing on how to take power. So if you look at it, the only person that can guarantee the interests of the Anglophones is Professor Maurice Kamto, because I've been closer to him, I monitor him, I've been in the opposition, even with people who were with me in the opposition and decided to join the ruling government in place. And I can tell you, through my analysis, my comparison, that we have such a person that has the impetus, he has the audacity, he has everything that it takes to lead this country forward.
But there have been a lot of questions on his leadership of the CRM political party, with some of your former comrades who have crossed the carpet. Some have even created their own.
Mr. Babla Jonathan, just permit me talk about
movements and so on.
Yes, permit me talk about the offivers in the CRM political party. You will understand that it is a party that is competitive, and being one of the parties that remains as the major hope of the nation, there are bound to be maneuvers in all dangerous factories to destabilize the party. But like I told you, the wisdom of the National Directorate, and especially with the open-mindedness of Professor Maurice Kamto to collaborate to ensure that everything is brought to normalcy, we are quite sure that the CRM remains the hope of the nation. And for those who are conniving, if at all, that is what they hope to maybe derail Cameroonians, annihilate their hope and that's their whole effort that they have consented since 2018 for change in this nation. I tell you, we have a God that will not allow them to do it.
Ben Aki, on the front page of the book Cameroon After Paul Biya, there is a question there. More international wars or stability through constitutional democracy? What is behind this question?
Mr. Babila, the question is clearly contrasting the situation we have. We have more internal wars. We already have the separatist war in Northwest and Southwest. And we have
sorry, let me just correct this. More internal wars or stability through constitutional democracy.
Yeah, so it's recognizing the fact that there are already internal wars in Cameroon. You have the separatist conflict in Northwest and Southwest. You have Boko Haram in the north. You have some rebels from from Central African Republic displaced by the Russians there, and then you have political parties that are clashing with the party in power. So you can imagine that if the party in power tries to disrupt the electoral chances of the opposition, just like they did in 2018. And I can predict now that the opposition is not going to take that line down, and they may be even willing to take up arms, because the UPC in the 1950s was not fighting using arms. They wanted to go to elections, they wanted to win, but each time they went to elections, the results were falsified, and victory was given to other people. Nyobe even lost in his hometown, something that nobody could imagine. It was only after that, as they were trying to protest, then the government went ahead and banned the party in 1955, and you ended up with the Maquisards. They went underground and adopted guerrilla tactics to fight the government. So that is the dark picture you have, that if the transition is not managed properly, the wars which are already going on will continue. But new wars will be added, for example, like militants of the opposition giving up on this idea of transition through the ballot box and peaceful change through the ballot box. They will say peaceful change cannot come, let us take up guns. Then you will have a state of war of all kinds of factions going on. But you have the other option. You could obtain stability, political stability, economic development, by adopting the principles of constitutional democracy. By that, what do I mean? First of all, respecting the fact that the sovereignty belongs to the people, and they express that through election. They choose their representatives, and it is a sacred matter to just even change one vote that is cast by a citizen. That is treason. That is declaration of war against the people. But if you adhere to that simple idea, power belongs to the people express this power through democratic means in accordance with pre-agreed rules which are just, then you can see that Cameroon can go towards stability step by step. In the book, I detail the process. I'm just trying to point this out also to a friend from our colleague from the CRM site. It details the process. We have to do everything possible to make sure that the winner of the next presidential election is the person chosen by the people, and the candidates are freely allowed to run, because the next step you will see is trying to prevent competitive candidates from becoming candidates. Constitutional democracy does not allow a party in power to block a competitive opponent from becoming a candidate. So there are certain measures. We need to get more people registered. We need to allow politicians to run for office. We need to count every vote. And if somebody even miscounts one vote, we should protest until that is corrected. And that is how you will get towards that. And if you're aware of what our platform, because I'm also the coordinator of English Cameroon for United Cameroon.
Right. What do you think about
the carry out opinion polls? These opinion polls give you an overview of the political landscape. So if the people know the relative strength of the politicians, it becomes more difficult for the electoral officers to change who the strong candidate is at an election. So all of these measures should be taken to make sure that the winner of the next presidential election is chosen according to the Constitution. That even means that if Mr. Biya were to leave power before his term expires, the Constitution should be followed meticulously, in which case you have an interim president and then you have elections organized within 120 days to choose the next president. So following the Constitution will allow us to avoid the whole scene of wars, which you could even have a military coup that some people are seeing in Francophone countries. So if you do that, then the next step is to recognize that federalism is the issue now in the country. You move from electing a president chosen by the people to a president putting together a committee to consultatively draft a constitution and put it to the people for vote in referendum, to vote on whether that federal constitution is good and vote on what the boundaries of the state should be. So I think that is the second question. Is Cameroon going to choose the wars, the path that leads to war, or is it going to choose the path that leads to stability? And that path that leads to stability, there are no two ways. There's no messiah. It is through the idea from law to law in accordance with democracy.
We'll continue with this discussion in a short while. Time for us to take interviews of the week right now.
A lot of things changed for us in 2016 when the crisis started in this area. In 2016, all companies, including Telka, were forced to pull out of Manu. So we were forced to gather our crops to take to Douala to them. But the separatist party set ablaze those trucks around Guti with the goods we were carrying. We had no other choice but to regroup and decide to carry our cocoa to Equinoxe to look for buyers.
They want that all the cocoa should be sold in Douala. When you look at the price variations, in Douala, they come to my village in Do and buy cocoa at 800 francs. Meanwhile, the Nigerians come to my village and buy cocoa at 1,500 francs. Look at the difference. Presently, we buy a sachet of chemicals at 1,000 francs a sachet. Just imagine, are we farmers slaves to this country? We are not slaves. At least we should give them the pride of place. We should give them that price advantage that we have from our neighboring country, Nigeria.
For 6 years now, we are not able to have any Cameroonian buyer in Manu. So we decided now to take the cocoa to Equinoxe to see that Nigerians will come there and collect the cocoa from us. When they collect like that, they even give us some advance. That is where we take to sponsor our children. That is why we are struggling. I have every year I must supply like 10 tons from my farms.
It was not the good manner to react, for them to react, because I have a meeting, and today if they wanted to meet the SEO, they could have come and tell me without making a lot of noise, without coming like riot. It's true that they have come in a peaceful manner, but we were not informed, the administration was not informed, and they did not have any authorization to organize that public manifestation. But that said, I promised them to forward all their grievances, all what they have come to tell me to the Arab. But for now, the exportation of cocoa to Nigeria is banned.
In positive peace, everybody makes an attempt to be positive towards one another, and therefore you find always everybody wants to be just and fair. You find that everybody tries to avoid violence. That's what positive peace means. But when it is negative, it is that there is no, everybody just wants to make sure there is no violence or there's no war or there's no conflict. That's not enough. That's just one aspect of peace. But peace, for it to be complete, for it to be positive, has to not be negative, or it should not be on the basis of fear. No, when the peace is on the basis of fear of that there's violence or there's brutality or there's conflict, that is negative peace. You want peace to also to be positive. That means the deliberate effort on the part of everybody to want to preserve each other, be nice to each other, be fair to each other, be just to each other, be helpful to each other, to be decent and nice to each other. The churches, the political parties, the NGOs, the traditional associations, community associations, religious associations, trade union associations, whatever they call them. These associations, which are groupings or associations of citizens, they must, in their regulation, internal bylaws and so forth and so on, and in their gatherings, whether they are tontines, whether they are whatever they call them, they have to be able to educate their members, about basic values and the culture of the nation. The state has the duty to enforce, to legislate, to execute, and to make decisions as to how to govern society, but the state also has a duty to also communicate. They communicate what they do, they communicate what the laws are, they communicate what has been done, they communicate on a daily basis. The state has to do that. All these vectors have to be able to do their part, each playing their part to do what is right.
Thank you for staying with us. Those were interviews of the week. Now, Silvanus Mutaga, earlier Ben Aki was talking about the Constitution, and in his book he talks about constitutional democracy. The Constitution gives the right to every Cameroonian to desire and become the head of state, including, of course, the son of the head of state, Frank Biya. There have been some agitations around him, but you and other political leaders already decrying what you call undemocratic, the possibility of undemocratic transfer of power, saying that Cameroon is not a kingdom where power should move from father to son. But if that were to be a possibility, will it not be constitutional for the president's son to want to become the head of state?
Mr. Babla Jonathan, there is the text, there's the context, and there's the pretext. Those three things, don't forget what really govern the legal field, even the media world. We are looking at the present context of our nation, Cameroon. Cameroonians have suffered a lot, especially by the fact that they think one man has ruled the nation for over 40 years and it has not brought any meaningful development. Social injustice has been on its rise and has reached its apex. We are of the opinion that the electoral system should be transparent and that Cameroonians at that appropriate moment would want or should go out and vote for the person that they think can best safeguard their interests and guarantee the future of their children. So, personally, I don't have any biased feelings against whosoever, but like I said, we have the opinion that like father, like son. So,
which is not scientific,
which is not scientifically talking from the it is an African addict, but as a Christian that I am, the Bible says the son should not be punished for the ills of his father. But like I said, we as Africans, it is an addict unless we want to change our color. It is often said, like father, like son.
A lion begets a lion.
A lion begets a lion. So what we of the CRM are vying for, like I still continue to sound on it emphatically, is that the electoral system should be a transparent electoral system. The CRM is not there's no way that almighty Barcelona can be afraid of a team. You know Barcelona when in the days that Barcelona used to be. In Cameroon politics, CRM is like the olden days Barcelona. At this particular juncture, no one should deceive you. It may sound funny to the detractors, but that is what the CRM is. I know the strength of the CRM. I know the strength of its leader. The CRM is extending its tentacles to the 10 regions of the nation at the speed of light. If not of the war in the northwest and southwest region, we would have been telling you that northwest and southwest is completely conquered by the CRM, because I receive calls, if not on weekly basis, from people telling me we want to take the CRM to Libya, we want to take the CRM to this place. In fact, we need your presence there. But I tell them, you know exactly how we are targeted. I have my fellow militants who are in prison. Just imagine those who imprison them seeing me there struggling to implant the party. They would maybe rally on, take the pretext of what is happening there and gun me down.
Is that why Professor Maurice Kamto has never gone there?
You should. That's the answer. You know that for certain. Somebody who went in for presidential elections in 2018 asked for security officers to accompany him there, and it wasn't guaranteed. What of the fact when there at this particular juncture, Professor Maurice Kamto loved the northwest and southwest region. When I talk with him, I see him shed tears. He remember those good days he used to go to the northwest, especially Bamenda, sometimes to Limbe and down to Kumba, and enjoy quiet times during weekends. It's practically impossible.
But since he became the president of the CRM, and a presidential candidate, for that matter, one of the leading political parties or politicians in Cameroon, is never gone there. That, to some people, is not a sign of love.
President Maurice Kamto was in the southwest region, I think, in 2018 prior to the presidential elections. He was in the southwest region. He reached Limbe, he was in Boya, he wanted to go down to Kumba, but from security reports which we had, it was being told that he has to be very careful, because at that particular point in time, the CRM was pulling strikes already, and anything was possible. You know, of recent, his travel to the northern regions, how it was maneuvered. If not of God who saved his life, he would have been killed in the northern regions. What more of a region that the rate of insecurity is high?
All right, Ben Aki, what do you think about the idea of an Anglophone president in Cameroon after President Paul Biya?
Mr. Babila, that in a constitutional democracy, this issue is decided by parties calculating how they want to win. Let me remind you that the third president of Cameroon was an Anglophone. His victory was stolen. Mr. Nif John Fungi, who just died. There are many indications that the election of 1992 was really
but he has never been president.
But he did not get into the presidency. But the point I'm making is that you do not need a special organization when elections are transparent to see that the statistics just give you that kind of result. So, but let me first take a step back. Let me take a step back to the question of the son of the president becoming the president in the future. Theoretically, that's possible in a constitutional democracy. But this is how the elections or the political scene in Cameroon today is. We have been measuring this as English Cameroon for United Cameroon platform. We have been measuring this through opinion polls. The understanding that is that we have a binary political platform. You have CPDM and some of its allies, and you have a very dominant Cameroon Renaissance movement on the opposition side, and it can form its allies there. So if the constitution is followed and the elections are transparent, we will end up with a presidential election where the candidates of CPDM and CRM will likely get a total of over 90% of the vote. The question is, which party can from there be a candidate? He is not, according to the information, he's not a registered member of the CPDM. And that's why in our opinion polls, we treat him as an opposition candidate. But when we rank the opposition candidate based on a statistically independent poll of Cameroonians in Cameroon, we see that Maurice Kamto always comes up with about 55–60%, and Mr. Libby with about 10%, and Frank Biya sometimes come in third. He's nowhere near the top of the opposition. Now, when you come to the CPDM side, which you know is a major party with representation all over the national territory and is not going to go away overnight, we realize that the top ranked candidates there. At one point, we even added Frank Biya to the CPDM, but the top ranked candidates in the CPDM have remained Mr. Joseph John Guti, who is the Prime Minister, Mr. Marafa, who is a political prisoner, followed by Mr. Alamin Usman May from the north, and then followed by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Philemon Yang, and then followed by the Minister of Health, Mr. Manauda Malachi. So, from this political situation, yes, we respect the Constitution. Yes, we go by democracy. But if these two are applied independently, there is no way Cameroonians will come to concretize a monarchical transition which we see in some Francophone countries. So what we are saying here is that if we look at the way Frank Biya is going about his presidential ambition, he has a nebulous organization called Mouvement de Franquistes. We don't know if this is a political party. We don't know if this is a civil society organization. That already tells you that the game has been rigged The rules of the game have been rigged, and it is no longer the idea of a constitutional democracy. Every Cameroonian is then called upon to stand up against such disruption of the principles of constitutional democracy. The reason it is good for us to do politics through political parties is that our colleague from the CRM is talking about the value of Campton. But when I look at Campton, I'm not looking at Campton, I'm looking at his party. I'm looking at the people who are working for him. I'm looking at how they work as a team. Even if it's not going to Northwest and Southwest, I want to see that there are CRM members on the ground who are doing something. A party is its membership. A party is the structure. And the leadership quality of a person is based on how he interacts with this. So I don't see this with respect to Frank Biya. That answers that question. Can he be a candidate? Yes. Would he win in a fair election? Election will be a clash of two parties, CPDM and its allies, and CRM and its allies. I don't see how Frank Biya becomes the central idea there. If he becomes the candidate of the CPDM, this is because power has been taken away from the northern candidates and the Anglophone candidates who are leading the poll of the CPDM. If CPDM wants to win, their best shot is to have an Anglophone candidate or to have a northern candidate. Now, coming to answer your question, what do I think about an Anglophone president? This is my honest assessment. On the side of the opposition, there is no Anglophone who has demonstrated in the last 5 years that they are fighting for the people and they have a broad coalition that can allow them to win a transparent election against the ruling party. That is an honest assessment. We know even the results from 2018. The SDF came in fourth in that election. I do not see an Anglophone who is strong enough in the opposition, and the opposition has moved from Frundi to Campton. That's the realization now. Come to the CPDM side. Yes, Mr. Biya has used Anglophone prime ministers to stabilize his government. There is no question about that. Anglophone prime ministers have brought more credibility to the government of the CPDM than any other ministry or region. It is time to pay them back. It is time to be responsive to that. And that is what the polls are discovering. The polls are saying, if you naturally allow it like that, the presidency was in the north with CNU, it came down to the center-southeast, and now the people are naturally seeing that let us have an Anglophone. The top 5 candidates have 2 Anglophone, current prime minister, former prime minister, and 3 people from the north. That's naturally how politics happens in a place where you respect the constitution, you respect the principles of democracy. But if we're talking about Frank Biya, please let us first start. How did he make his money? How is he making his money? How is he taking the money from the state now and going to Lamidos, going to sultans, going to traditional rulers, and buying young people? Believe me, Mr. Babila, even among Anglophones, I get reports from young people who are fighting for change. They are being contacted by this nebulous movement. It's not a political party. It's not a civil society organization that I know so far, but it's going around conducting politics and using state money. I think that money is state money. And I just want to throw this challenge to my colleague from the CRM party. Tell us, where is Frank Biya movement getting the money? Right? So that's where politics begin. There is no chance that Frank Biya has. As of now, we've measured this for the last 3 years, and the tendency is showing that he's not leading. But the best chance for Anglophones to have a president is for the CPDM to put forward an Anglophone candidate. They deserve it. They have served the CPDM very well, and especially the Southwest. So this is how you get to the possible Anglophone president, but you don't need anything extra. In 1992, an Anglophone launched multi-partisan, and the people recognized that in the far north, in the north, in the east, and they voted for him. If the rules were respected, we would have had a third president who is Anglophone without having to do anything special.
All right, Ben Aki, thank you so much for your time. You're a civil society activist, author of several books, including The West Cameroon Problem and Its Solution, We the People of Cameroon Touts a New Federal Constitution and Cameroon, after President Paul Biya. You are Associate Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at Syracuse University in the United States of America. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babila, and thank you, my colleague from the CRM, and thank you for the opportunity you have given me to express my view. I'm just trying to make a modest contribution to the discussion we, the Cameroonian people, should be making, should be having now to make sure that the change in Cameroon is peaceful and constitutional, because Cameroon belongs to all of us, and we should endeavor to keep it politically stable and prosperous.
Right, Sylvanus Mutaga, Special Advisor to the National President of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, CRM Political Party, Professor Maurice Kamto. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Babila Jonathan, for the invitation. A million thanks to the televiewers who have been watching this program. My last word to the Biya regime is that our militants in the Kondenge Center Prison, the New Bay Center Prison in Douala, their stay there has been overdue. 3 years is enough. They were sentenced illegally, and I think it's high time somebody told President Biya to release them, because they were fighting on the premise of democracy.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today's edition of The Inside. Goodbye.